Welcome to lesson 4 of the Heterotroph series in module 2, Organisation of Living Things. In part 1 of this video today, we're going to be looking at gas exchange structures that allow heterotrophs obviously to exchange gas with their external environment. So here we need to remember that we are comparing those gas requirements of heterotrophs with autotrophs. And the way in which heterotrophs exchange gases is in the form of respiratory systems. And these are really important to exchange both oxygen and carbon dioxide for the process of cellular respiration. The amount of respiration that occur is limited by the rate of oxygen that's supplied to the cells, as this is responsible for that production of energy. And any buildup of carbon dioxide that is not removed by the body from the respiratory system can decrease the body pH, and this can cause damaging effects on the structure and function of many important molecules. And the gas exchange surfaces that we're closely looking at today are very closely linked to the transport systems, specifically the blood, and they are actually both closely linked in their theory but also in practice, and this assures that gases can move efficiently between cells and the environment. And we've looked at diffusion previously, and we know that diffusion can take place, and it takes best over small and thin surfaces, and the way in which it is maximized in the respiratory systems is through a moist cell membrane. And this cell membrane allows the oxygen to dissolve in the layer of extracellular fluid, and then it crosses the cell membrane and enters the body. The permeability of the membrane is increased because of the surface area of the membrane and also because of the thickness of the membrane. So this allows the oxygen that we must intake into our body to be exchanged quite quickly. For a gas exchange surface to work efficiently, it must have a large surface area, and usually and we'll see an example of alveoli and how it increases the surface area in which gases can move through. It must be quite a thin barrier and allows the gas to pass through the barrier easily. There must be an adequate supply of the gas that's being transferred, and there must be an efficient way to remove the substance after transfer. So it's all well and good that oxygen passes through the membrane, but there must be transported to avoid accumulation and a slow transfer if it is kept close, because we know that things will move with a gradient. So the way in which humans breathe air takes a few pathways, and the first part and the key parts are in the nasal cavity, where we see air drawn in through the nose and then passes into the nasal cavity and the pharynx. And this is the preferred method of breathing, and it's the way in which we teach young people to breathe when they're first starting sport. And this is because nose breathing actually filters the air as it passes through the nose. It's actually moistened by the surfaces in which it passes by, and it's warmed in the nasal passages to ensure that the oxygen is able to be efficiently transported through the membranes later on in the process. So from the nasal cavity, it then moves to the airways, in which any of the cells which cover this airway are covered in cilia, and they also secrete mucus. And we see that in this airway passage, it is able to trap particles of dust or bacteria that may be found in the air. And then it then moves to the alveoli, where the gas exchange actually takes place. It's a thin layer of cells, and they're supplied with blood capillaries, which facilitate the diffusion through the large surface area. So here we can see a bit of a picture of how it does pass through the nasal cavity, through the airway, and into the lungs themselves. And we can see that the end of the lungs, or the alveolus, which is up in our top right hand corner, we see it branch into these tiny little bits that almost look like trees. And the more branches that we have, the greater the surface area that is available for gas exchange. So, in terms of lung ventilation and how we actually move our air across our gas exchange surface is regulated by a few things. So, the ventilation is that active movement, and we can measure that movement of air. We can measure the volume of it by measuring our tidal volume. And our vital capacity is the maximum volume of air that we can move in and out of our lungs at any one time. And then every time we breathe in and out, we actually don't breathe out all of the air that is in our lungs. And so our residual volume is that volume of the air left after exhalation. Inhalation requires energy, whereas exhalation is just the elastic recoil of the thorax as it returns to its relaxed state. So the exhalation process does not actually use energy. Here we can see a picture on the left-hand side of exhalation and inhalation, and we can see that it is regulated by the movement of the diaphragm. And we can see that, but if we just breathe in and out, we can see how our ribs are raised due to this diaphragm. And we can see here over on the the right-hand side, that our inhalation, our exhalation, and the amount of volume that our lungs use changes depending on what we're actually doing, such as exercise or whether we're just at rest. Insects are unlike humans, however, they do have a system of branching tubes called the trachea within their body, and these actually open to the external environment through some pores. They're also known as spiracles along their abdomen. And this is why fly spray works effectively, as it traps these spiracles and causes them not to be able to breathe. And these spiracles can be classified as either intake spiracles or expiration spiracles, as to whether the air moves in or out through that spiracle. However, the size of the hole in which the air moves in and out can be closed, and it also allows it to prevent water loss. Here we can see a picture of how they line the insect's body, and the oxygen and the carbon dioxide moves freely in and out of that spiracle as required. Fish are also different in that their respiratory surface are gills, and the oxygen is moved into the body as the water flows over the gills. Instead of having the alveoli or the spiracles, they have gills, and these are further divided into lamellae, which provide the large surface area, over which water can flow and the oxygen can be taken in. We see, however, that blood flows in the opposite direction to the flow of water, which increases the efficiency of the gas exchange process. And we can see these small structures here and how they are divided into fine little filaments, which allow for that large surface area. Frogs, again, are different. They have two respiratory surfaces, both the lungs and the skin. And the skin works effectively as it is always constantly moist. And it also has a well developed blood supply, which we know are two of the characteristics for an effective respiratory surface. Oxygen can diffuse in through the moist skin, and then it's transported by the blood to the heart. However, they don't have a diaphragm in which they can breathe in through their lungs. So the air is passed in and out through the pumping movement or the buccal pump, which is how we see their throat enlarge and decrease in size over time. So here we can see how it does actually pass in and where those structures are. When the respiratory system malfunctions, we can get asthma, and that's where our bronchi and our bronchioles are sensitive to particles in the air. And then we can see that the airway, the muscle that lines it, instead of being nice and thin and allowing the air to pass through effectively, we can see that they do swell and the muscles can constrict the airway. And then we increase the resistance of the flow of air, both into and out of the lungs. Another example is emphysema, where we see the air sacs in the lungs break down, which then reduces the surface area for gas exchange. And then the last one is pneumonia, where we see the air space that would usually be there filled with a fluid, which also reduces the area of the lung surface in contact with the air. That concludes our video for today. Make sure you tune in to part 2 of the heterotroph series.